Welcome to the Anton Stetner podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Kamala Harris's housing plan. And the question is it solving the real estate problem or making a crisis worse?
And everyone's going to have opinions on this one way or another based on politics. We're going to do our best here to this is our unbiased opinion. Had to go do a lot of research just to even find these policies. So I had to go read a bunch of articles, had to go look at the White House press releases, and dig through a ton of information. What I will say I don't like, or what concerns me, is I couldn't go to kamalaharris.com and find a prominent display right on her website of this is my proposals, these are my policies, this is my platform. When you go to the competition and go look at Trump, it's very clear. So that part annoyed me while I was doing my research. But there's something to talk about or to set the stage here. Why is housing such an important topic in relation to politics and the presidential election? Why does this crisis exist? And then where is she saying that she's going to make a difference? And then from our perspective, as, been in real estate for 21 years. We own brokerages. We've sold thousands of properties. We own rental properties. We do land development. So from our perspective, what does this mean? Okay.
What's the state of real estate right now in a nutshell in America, would you say, before you get into these policies? Because that's how it's going to either make it worse or fix it.
The state of real estate is that U.S. is in a housing crisis. Zillow said we're 4.5 million units behind. When the Federal Reserve decided, hey, I'm going to raise interest rates at the fastest they've done in 40 years, straight up, what happened is real estate transactions went back to the same level of sales we were doing during the Great Recession. And in the last few months, we're at the level of 2009. Okay, that's what's crazy. We haven't been here in a long time. So real estate transaction volume is slow. You do have declining prices in some markets, but overall, throughout most of the United States, prices are still going up despite 7% interest rates, and you have historically low inventory. Well, why do you have historically low inventory? Because during the Great Recession, we stopped building homes and we're about 4.5 million units behind, according to Zillow. Why is housing so important? It's a basic human need. We all got to live somewhere. Why is it so important in politics? And this was a twist I didn't think about until I was doing all this research, is a lot of her policies are centered around homeownership. And when you look at who votes and who doesn't vote, 65% of the U.S. roughly owns a home. So 35% does not. And when people own a home, they're more likely to vote. So part of these policies is already feeding a certain demographic because it's geared towards them, and that's what causes more votes. So just something to be thinking about as politicians are proposing these items.
And generally speaking, would you say housing is the most unaffordable it's ever been, regardless of politics and policies? It just is unaffordable for most Americans.
Housing is the most unaffordable that it's been since the late 70s and early 80s. That was actually the peak of unaffordability. This is the second time in history it's the most unaffordable. So we win the prize for second place, but we're not first place. Well, why was that? Well, during the late 70s and 80s, it's because interest rates got so high. Same thing happened here. Interest rates got so high. The bigger factor today is prices are also so high. So you've got interest rates at a basically almost a 40-year high, and then you've got prices at an all-time high, even though they dipped down a little bit in 2022.
Boom. All right. So what is the first part of her real estate policy, or how is she going to fix the problem?
Well, I think there's 11 bullet points that we're basically going to go through here. So the first one is she wants to offer $25,000 in federal down payment assistance to first-time home buyers. If you've paid your rent on time for the last 2 years and you're a first-time home buyer, that appears to be the qualifier. Once again, I say appears to be because I have got to pull this from a bunch of news articles. I can't get it directly in a press release. The cost of this subsidy, they estimate, will be about $100 billion. Critics argue that it's $500 billion or $500 billion that this would have to subsidize. And then what this does is it's subsidizing demand while not improving supply or the efficiency of supply. So basically, this becomes a massively expensive program that then hurts supply. Let me explain. If every buyer in the US that's a first-time home buyer, that's a large population of buyers, is instantly given 25 grand. If we do this to anything, pens, for example, everyone has money to go buy more pens or another Yeti cup. Does the price of the pen or the Yeti go up or down?
Goes up for sure.
It massively goes up. So
Unless you double the supply of the pens.
unless you double the supply of the pens. But there's not enough supply coming. So what this is this a mash? This is one of those big inflationary items. You would expect to see the average price of a home shoot up between 25 to 50 grand, because all of a sudden we'll have buyers that didn't qualify before that now qualify. So we're going to massively increase demand without goosing the supply side. She does talk about supply later, but we'll get to that. There's definitely some flaws there. So Zandy and Parrott said, those are economists, the cost will be $125 billion, a hefty tab to be paid with spending cuts or taxes. Since adding to the federal deficit would drive up mortgage rates and undermining the very housing affordability it's trying to afford. Let me explain. If we have to give away a bunch of tax revenue to do this, in addition to supply and demand, what that does is that puts pressure on our bonds, which drives up mortgage rates. That's what these two economists are saying. And remember, the U.S. is already putting massive pressure on our own bonds because we're overspending by $1 trillion every 90 days in deficit spending. So this will just be adding to that deficit spending. One of the major critics said for this particular proposal that citizenship does not appear to be a requirement. And so, immigration is a hot topic during this election cycle. And if they make citizenship a topic, and we're already having problems with the border and illegals and housing, this would just further exasperate that issue.
Pretty crazy, because it just would be assumed that you would have to be a citizen of this country to get some of the benefits of these policies. But then that potentially, and by the way, I'm like pro-immigration.
Yes.
I want to invite more people, hopefully as legally as possible. But imagine how many more people are going to come to this country if they know they're going to get $25,000 towards a house. Right? It's just simple logic. It's put up a sign and be like, hey, you guys, free money for your first house.
It's simple logic. And my mom is an immigrant. My dad's parents were immigrants. I am 1,000% pro-immigration, but I'm pro-immigration where we do it through the proper channels, because my family did, and we go recruit talent. I want talented people. We live in the Seattle Metro, coming in working for our tech companies, coming in and working for our ports, working for Boeing, things like that. Next one, bullet point 2. So this was originally proposed by the Biden-Harris administration, and it looks like Kamala intends to carry this on, because there's no point of her, I don't see where she says she's withdrawing it. So point number 2 is a $10,000 tax credit to first-time homebuyers. So the first one is $25,000 in down payment assistance. The second one is a $10,000 tax credit. This will do all of the same things. It basically creates an incentive and more demand without changing the supply function. Okay, so I'm not for bullet point 1 or bullet point 2. I am very much for first-time home buyers, but I'm for incentives and ways for us to create supply to help them. Because think about it like this. If we weren't 4.5 million units behind, let's say we were 1.5 million ahead, would house prices go up or down?
Okay, say that again, because I'm thinking about how this $10,000 will affect how much you're willing to offer a house. I was doing that math as you're talking. So say it again.
No worries. So right now, remember, according to Zillow, we're 4.5 million units behind. What happens, though, to the housing market, to home prices, to the available inventory, if we were 1.5 million units ahead?
Well, ahead as in like more houses?
Excess supply.
Oh, then there'd be more houses for people to buy, and potentially house prices could come down.
Bingo.
Or at least stay steady.
Bingo. So if you want affordability, what I'm trying to demonstrate is you got to build the supply.
Which kind of goes into point number 3.
Point number 3, Kamala Harris, you killed it on this one. I'm in love with point number 3. The logic, the reasoning, though, is fundamentally flawed. Point number 3 is she wants to increase home building by 3 million units over the next 4 years. This sounds amazing, and what that means is, let's just break it down. 3 million divided by 4. It's about 750,000 units each year. Here's where I love what she's trying to do. She's saying we want to create tax incentives, which would be the first of its kind for home builders to build starter homes. They must be sold to first-time home buyers. This is great. Here's where it becomes laughable. I'm sorry you can't do math again. The math doesn't math. Let me explain. So you can go look at the annual private sector housing completions. Okay. And currently, once again, we'll pound on this same stat from Zillow, we're 4.5 million units behind. In 2023, we built 1.45 million homes. In the Great Recession, we bottomed in 2011 at 584,000 homes. Previously, we peaked with oversupply in 2006 with almost 2 million homes at 1.989 million. The previous peak before that was in 1973 with 2.11 million. So from 96 until 2006, we completed an average of 1.6 million housing units every year. Then construction plunged to just over 500,000 units in 2011. Since then, it's slowly climbed back, but we haven't gotten back to the peak. Why? During that same time period, because we've been doing new construction and land development during that same time period, we started doing that in 2003. From 2003, when we started, until 2007, when the market started crashing, as a builder or a developer, you could finance at 100% loan to value. Go watch The Big Short. Learn about mortgage-backed securities. The moral of the story is we gave homeowners loans they couldn't afford. Well, guess what we did to builders and developers? We gave them money that they shouldn't have ever had. And they could finance projects at 100% loan to value. And today they have to have 25 to 35% in cash. So 1, homes require much more cash to build them today. 2, the cost of labor went through the roof due to inflation. 3, the cost of materials went through the roof due to inflation. 4, and this is one of the biggest problems, the red tape quadrupled during that same time period, especially for us here in the Seattle Metro. It's become harder and harder and harder to get a building permit. I'm doing a land development project right now. I know what I'm doing. I've been working on it for 4 years. I just got its first set of approval. That means we're going to start turning dirt here, hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. Then winter will set in because we're in the rainy state. Then next year in the springtime, probably to about midsummer, we'll finish all the lots. That means I might be building those homes that following fall, which means they might be done the next spring. That means it took 6 years to do that land development cycle. When you look at a big multifamily building, you're looking at a 3 to a 4 year minimum. And so these timelines and the red tape is really what's killing us.
Now, to play the other side, though, isn't this policy, the third one, about adding more units, better than worse?
This one's better.
If there's nothing happening in terms of number 3, that's worse than if this is happening. So it would hypothetically at least help.
It will help, but there's no meat and potatoes on how they're going to help. There's no plan on how they're going to execute.
So there's just crackers on a plate?
This isn't even crackers on the plate. This is the crumbs left on the plate. Someone ate
horrible,
all the cheese.
Horrible.
They ate the meat. There's like 2 olives in the corner and a couple crackers.
I'm getting hungry. Olives? There's at least olives.
Well, so due to the high inflation, okay, the cost of construction, what's been happening with building permits? Building permits are currently declining. Development applications are declining, and our current run rate as of July 2024 is less than 1.4 units, 1.4 million. So it looks like in 2024, we're going to build less homes than we did in 2023, And we're trending down, which means as rates go down, there's not going to be enough supply. We've talked about this in previous episodes. All of our subscribers get this, is as these rates come down, the demand's going to increase anyway, and prices are going to go up even more. Also, or lastly, and I'm going to hit on this again, some of these policies were started during 2022 with Biden. Biden-Harris already started some of these policies and said they were going to do this. They said they were going to build 5 million units starting in 2022. 2 years later, have they done anything? Have they moved the needle at all? And the answer is no, they haven't. And the answer is real estate got worse. We actually sold less homes. The cost to buy them went up. The labor to build them went up. The materials went up. And then the red tape went up. So they actually already started working on this, which is the part that kind of irritates me. And we haven't made any progress yet. So I love the policy. Be curious to know a little more meat and potatoes on how you'd implement it.
Point number 4, expand tax incentives to home builders.
This part I love too. Okay, so this part I completely agree with. They can do this. This will help. I've said this before. If you want anything, you have to incentivize it. Some of our listeners may not remember this, but we incentivized broadband all across the U.S. It was almost $2 trillion that we spent in building out our internet data structure, the backbone. That now has created massive innovation, massive economic boom. We're kind of doing that same thing with AI right now, but that's being done by corporations. Corporations have reportedly spent like $4 trillion on AI with, only like 800 billion in revenue coming back to them. So if we incentivize corporations to go build smaller homes, first-time home buyer product, it will work. It has worked before. So I really believe in this. What they would do is they would expand. It's called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. It's referred to as the LIHTC. I went and looked into how that's been used. I didn't realize it's been around for so long. So the LIHTC has been around since 1984. It's subsidized 3.13 million housing units. The annual spend or the cost of that program has been about $8 billion a year. The issue, though, is the majority of them have been multi-family projects and not single family. Okay? So one of the things where the government tricks us, where they're tricksy, the tricksy little, hobbits, and is they say affordable housing. Affordable housing to me means a home for you, home for me, a home for someone off the street, a single family home with a cute little yard and a white picket fence. Affordable housing to the government means a small apartment unit for someone to live in. Now, we need both, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying, but I want to hear more politicians talk about attainable home ownership. There's a really big difference. They pontificate and use rhetoric and say affordable housing, and they accomplish this word through small apartment units. And I don't think that's good for our society. I believe in a strong middle class. I want to see more home ownership.
Is the next one tax credit for renovating homes?
Yes, correct. One of the things that happens is, and sometimes we get a little hate on the internet for this too, because we flip homes. We flip homes. We build homes. You're a big bad flipper. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't make a profit.
You should just let the house go to crap.
Bingo, brother. You should just let it rot into the ground.
Just let the moss grow on the roof so it leaks water and no one else can live there, and that's the way it should be. Let the squatters have their squatting,
exactly.
environment.
So the vast majority of properties that we've flipped have never been beautiful. They've been in massive disrepair because we've got to do a full remodel on them in order to create a margin. So we took something that's generally on the verge of becoming a non-usable housing unit, and then we repair it and get it back to the market. What they're saying here is they're saying that they want to provide a tax credit for if the repair costs would exceed the property's value. And this would be in the residential 1 to 4 unit space versus the other one is probably just the way the government works is going to get pushed more towards the multifamily space. So once again, brilliant. I want to know a little bit more on how you would implement this. This fills that gap, like I said, between the multifamily and the single family of the LIHTC. The problem is, and you can go to neighborhoodhomesinvestmentact.org and look at the information on this. They believe it would only impact about 25,000 units. So that's kind of a drop in the bucket, but it would keep a little bit extra housing alive.
Yeah, to the point of big bad flippers or, evil real estate investors. This housing problem and the fix to make it better is not a one solution strategy. It's multiple. Like you said, it's a drop in the bucket. But the reason this is a big deal is that house down the street that no one can live in, right? Except for squatters who are desperate or homeless people. Nothing wrong with them having housing, but there's appropriate places for that. It's not usable.
Yeah.
And if it's not usable, guess what? You're going to either have to tear it down and build another one, which costs even more, or just fix it up if it has the bones to do that. And the only reason I bring it up is I've flipped houses in the past that literally nobody would want to live in that can afford a beautiful home. And because it was fixed up, now it is somebody's home. And that's probably more than 25,000 units if you really look across a whole nation. You just have to have the incentive for somebody that can't build a home, right? Or develop a whole neighborhood to be able to go do that. Because would you agree with this? The first time flipper is probably a beginner real estate investor. And it might be somebody that lives on that street that has a little bit of cash, but not enough to get them over the hump.
It's exactly what it is.
And the government can't do everything. You need American citizens, new entrepreneurs, business people to fix America, not the government, but they can make it a little bit easier and incentivize it. Because if you don't, I believe entrepreneurs are going to still fix America no matter what, but it just might take longer.
If we incentivize the behavior, we can have it happen faster. And what we've seen, now doing this for 20 years, we'll go into a neighborhood and we might be the first person that flipped a home in that neighborhood. All of a sudden, 1 year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, there's like 3 or 4 of them. And what happens is that whole neighborhood starts to go through a transition and just starts to change because it's the natural keeping up with the Joneses. And when one home starts to look better, the neighbor looks over and goes, you know what, honey, we should paint our house. And she goes, yeah, we should do that. And then all of a sudden, everything starts to change. So it makes a bigger impact than what people think. And I agree with you. The housing crisis is not one issue. And this is why I want politicians to just don't focus on the one issue and focus on the votes. Focus on the crisis. We need 4.5 million units. One thing's not going to solve it. It's going to be a combination of 10, 20 things all working together.
All right. Next one is rent caps.
Yes.
Is that good or bad?
This is the proverbial big bad wolf. So this was proposed by Biden and then once again supported by Harris. The rhetoric is that the corporation is taking over your neighborhood and that's what's driving up rents. And so they proposed an annual cap increase of 5% a year on corporate-owned rentals. And they were asking Congress to put an end to price fixing by corporate landlords who allegedly use algorithms and collude to jack up rents higher than normal. Let's dig into this for just 2 seconds. 1, 3.8% of the homes in the U.S. are corporate-owned. 2, the largest corporate owner is Invitation Homes. 3, for the vast majority of the U.S., they can't impact the market. There are certain markets, though, in the Carolinas, in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona, where these hedge funds have bought up a large percentage of the market and they may own whole neighborhoods or big chunks of communities. I'm for the limiting of that. I'm not for the squashing of that. Let me explain. When you're 4.5 million units behind, I don't care who owns it. Somebody needs to own it. Somebody needs to take care of it. Somebody needs to build it because we need it that bad. they're actually part of the solution, not the actual problem. What we need to do is we need to create guardrails that if a corporation does start to become a monopoly in housing, just like Google's being attacked right now for monopolistic tendencies, like Microsoft was attacked before, like Ma Bell back in the day. I'm fine with doing that with corporations, but the idea of putting a rent cap on, go research rent caps throughout the United States in every city they've ever been implemented. Here's what happens. They then jack up the rent to the maximum every single year, no matter what, and then they defer maintenance because they may not have the money to fix up the property. The quality of the property and the quality of the tenant goes down, the quality of the housing. And then if the government steps in to then take it over and subsidize it, that process just continues faster, unfortunately. If you want rents to appreciate at a normal rate, build more units.
To be fair, though, I think they're onto something. If they cap rents, we should also cap politicians' salaries. And also,
I'm for that.
Let's cap their investment returns, okay? Anything excess on that cap goes right into people's, rental, budgets, rental bank accounts.
Yeah.
I think there's something to this whole capping of profits.
Well, I would be willing to make that kind of a cap trade. So if Nancy Pelosi, the greatest stock trader of all time, massively outperformed the S&P 500 and her gains went into, fixing the hole in Social Security that was drained by politicians anyway, I'm down for that. Okay. Jokes aside, though, whether it's a politician, a business, whatever, most of the time, price fixing has never resulted in any form, has never resulted in the result people want of a quality product at a good price with competition. It usually drives the competition out, drives down the quality of the product, and the consumer is left holding the bag.
There you go. You already kind of talked about this, but barring corporations from owning single-family homes. So to explain that, not allowing an entity to own a house versus a person to own a house.
Yeah. So once again, this isn't as clearly defined, so we've got to dig a little bit. What I'm going to do on this one is there was a couple bills that were being supported, but there was an article in Vox specifically, and the title was, or maybe it was a subtitle, Kamala Harris's big housing plan has a big problem. And I thought this was so eloquently written, so I'm just going to read a little part of what she said. Harris's plan further incentivizes home buying over renting by deterring large investors from renting out single-family homes. A policy that would expand the supply of housing available to home buyers at the cost of shrinking the supply to renters. So what we don't think about as politicians are talking about their policies is there's always a teeter-totter. If we incentivize by offering money to first-time home buyers, what we're actually doing is we're putting renters at a disadvantage in that situation. More counterintuitively, it's not necessarily equitable to bar large investors from buying and leasing single-family homes, as such a policy effectively reduces the supply of housing to such available renters. And that's what we kind of talked about earlier. If we prevent corporations, because they don't define a corporation, because I got a corporation, you got a corporation, all my friends got corporations. So are we talking about a corporation that owns one property? Or are we talking about Invitation Homes, which is the largest in the U.S.? Or is there a threshold? 100 properties? Don't know. So the agenda would allow investors to rent out large number of apartments, but then would punish them if they buy or lease single-family properties. So we have to think about this. We're okay with corporate America controlling those massive apartment complexes. We're not okay with corporate America controlling a single-family home. Well, the answer is why? Well, and this is where she makes a wonderful argument again. She said, is there a presumption that home buyers should enjoy privileged access to single-family homes versus a renter? Amazing. So next, she went on in the article and said that there's a widespread belief among progressive Democrats that large investors buying up homes is a major driver of rent growth. The theory is that when a corporation owns a lot of homes in that area, they have more price-setting power as there's less competition. An account of why housing costs are high today, however, says this is totally implausible. And she cites a very similar statistics I do. She said, as of 2022, institutional investors own 3% of single-family homes, and that the largest one, Invitation Homes, owned 0.6% of all such homes. So there's not a monopoly yet in single-family.
Quick question on this note. What is a good percentage of renters versus homeowners?
Historically speaking, the U.S. has hovered right around 35% is renters and 65% are homeowners. Leading up to the Great Recession, we had this big push from Republicans and Democrats to get more people into homes, which led to, the Big Short. But homeownership, I believe, during that time frame, we got up to like 69%. And then right afterwards, it went into the low 60s and climbed back up towards the average right now.
All right. Are we on number 8?
Number 8.
Repurpose some federal land to build affordable housing.
So the federal government manages and owns 640 million acres inside of the U.S.
Does that include forest land too?
Yes.
Okay.
This is forest land, conserve land, Bureau of Land Management, parks, everything, which is about 28% of the total land in the U.S. I actually didn't realize it was that big. So how much does the federal government sell? So generally speaking, the Bureau of Land Management, which manages most of that land, sells a very small amount every year, like just minuscule. They were established in 1976, and their emphasis is actually on retaining public lands. So Trump said this too. Biden says this too. I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but I like the idea. I like the idea of the federal government identifying properties that are close to major metros or in the path of growth and then putting that out there for, they're going to call it affordable housing. I want to go back and call it attainable home ownership. And so then I was curious. I was like, well, what's the process of buying a federal land? So usually it's scattered or isolated tracts. They're usually difficult to manage, or they're no longer part of the BLM's in original purpose. So they put it out there, and they put it out there for public auction, for direct sale, for a modified competitive bid. And generally speaking, you can contact the Bureau of Land Management, or the General Services Administration also sells the property and then lists them on auctions. Love this idea. Don't know if it's going to be able to get much support, because we also have to conserve our public lands for the future. We also have to conserve that for our natural resources, for protection of the U.S., for safety, and for environmental reasons. So if it's a abandoned orphan piece of property that's not, serving us, yeah, let's get rid of it. But if it's part of, the national forest or parks, I can't support that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about something practical would be maybe a closed down military base.
Bingo.
Right? Usually they're pretty big and in really busy areas. But I wonder what they do with those bases. I wonder if they retain them just in case, or that would be a good example. But yeah, my first thought was 2 things. The reason they have this federal land is for forests and public spaces, public parks, so that we still have nature. And then secondly, it's like waving a coupon you just printed out. Hey, I got this. I could give it to you, right? So to get voted in. Okay, so number 9, lower housing costs by cutting red tape to build more housing.
So this really needs to be done. And here in the Seattle metro, basically most of the West Coast, we have a massive amount of red tape for land development. Earlier, I talked about how we've been working on a development project for 4 years. The So the proposal or the idea is to eliminate the red tape and land development process, and then discouraging this NIMBYism, this not in my backyard, that's really happening all across the U.S. So Biden-Harris started this. I mentioned this kind of earlier. The new Biden-Harris administration housing supply action plan was put together to help close the housing supply gap in 5 years in 2022. Has anything massively
Doesn't
closed?
seem like it, but I don't know for sure.
Nothing's happened, brother. So we've already been working on this for 2 years, and we haven't made any progress.
Well, also, too, from what you've said and what I know, it seems like the red tape is worse.
The red tape is getting massively worse.
So, just objectively from our own experience and what we've observed, we can actually say since 2022,
Yes,
it's gotten worse. So whatever they said they were going to do probably hasn't been done or hasn't helped.
So here's an exact example from the Seattle Metro where we build. Since 2022, the energy credit requirements for new construction have gone up, and they basically did away with natural gas. So there's an initiative right now to bring back natural gas, but you cannot get enough energy credits today to put natural gas into a new home.
You should explain that because it's a little confusing. I know where you're going, but what is an energy credit requirement? Yep. And why would that make it so natural gas isn't an option?
It's a great question. So sometimes you forget when you touch everything over and over again. When you look at the energy efficiency of a house, it's how much it's going to use. Maybe you've heard of the net zero home or the Energy Star appliance. The net zero home it's basically, it can survive on its own energy. The Energy Star appliance is it's using less. What those are thermally efficient homes. They've got high U value and insulation value in the windows. There's high insulation in the walls. There is sometimes exterior insulation. That's basically almost required now in our area, exterior insulation. There's high insulation in the attic. There's insulation under the slab. There is an air coefficient inside of the home that seals it up. So if you can't achieve that air coefficient, you literally have to put a machine in there that sprays out this liquid and blows it into all the little cracks in the home to seal up those cracks right now. When you do all of this, all of a sudden you have to then be able to get clean air from the exterior of the home because the home's so airtight. The efficiency of the furnace has to go up. So the number of and for each one of these little items, you get a number of credits. What they did was they marked down the credits that you get for gas. So you have to do so many other things, which becomes economically prohibitive. So you basically can't put natural gas into a home unless you're really rich.
That's a big deal here in the Seattle area because Washington has fairly affordable natural gas.
Extremely affordable natural gas.
So if you can't use it, you're artificially making the home more expensive.
Yes.
While not being kind of reasonable with the resources that we have.
They want us to be completely, Washington State, when I say they, want us to be completely off natural gas, and that's what that initiative was basically to cut off natural gas even to the homes that are being supplied. And
then going back to the whole point, this is an example of more red tape. Because if you took the red tape off, you'd be like, hey, we're going to not make these energy credits as important. Then you can use natural gas. The house has natural gas to it. That's affordable, making the house more affordable
Bingo.
To a buyer or somebody that needs it.
The increase in energy credits that happened this year added between 30 to 50 grand to the price of a home in Washington State, depending on its size. I'm talking 30 grand for a small home, 50 grand for a 2,600, 2,800 square foot home. That's a huge difference. So if the average price of a home in our area is 700 grand and you said 50 grand to it, what is that, 8%? It's an 8% increase because of the energy credits. So we got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but this is the red tape. And so I went and looked to see how much this red tape is costing. According to the National Association of Home Builders, regulatory costs account for 23.8% of the final price of a single-family home across the U.S. And what we're demonstrating to you is here in the Seattle Metro and in Washington, that number's even higher.
Boom. All right. So number 10, I feel, is such a big deal.
This one scares me.
And such a big story. You should say what number 10 is, why it's a problem, and then kind of explain, if it's good or bad.
So Benji just left us with a bomb there. This is one of those ones because the policy is not defined clearly. This has the threat to be a nuclear bomb to our economy. Kamala Harris has proposed a tax on unrealized capital gains. And how they put it was they said a 25% minimum tax on unrealized capital gains for Americans with a net worth of 100 million or more. So the average person just said, okay, that doesn't affect me. But wait, it gets worse, and I'll explain. So this would affect 0.01, less than 0.01 of all taxpayers. It's 9,850 Americans that had that net worth, according to Henley and Partners and New World Wealth. So they say this is focused on just a small group. And this is they say it would start with just stocks or ownership in a business. But I want to go through what we've done in the past with taxes. So in our history in the U.S., I went and did this research. So I had fun learning about this stuff. In 1962, the United States introduced the first federal income tax to help fund the Civil War. It was directed at the top 1% of income earners at the time. And they said, this will never get to everyone else. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? They were subject to a tax rate of 5% for any income over 10 grand. Of course, that was a significant amount of money back in the late, 1862. And then it leveraged a 3% tax rate on people between $600 and $10,000. So in the United States, I had to go do the research on this. If you were a skilled laborer, you were making between $500 to $600 annually. If you were an unskilled laborer, which was the majority of the U.S. at the time, you were making $300 a year. So this tax bill that they introduced in 1862 didn't affect the majority. It only affected really the top 1%. Do you know what the highest, don't look down at the notes, the highest U.S. marginal income tax rate was?
Back then?
No, throughout our whole history.
I'm going to guess 60 to 70%.
94% in 1945 and 1944 to pay for the war. So that number today is 37% is our top income tax bracket. No, think about it again. They said this was only for the evil, mean 1%. Unrealized capital gains tax will only be for the 1%, but history has shown us that we just come and get it from everyone. Let me give another example. Everyone knows we pay taxes on our phones. Do you know where it came from?
Civil War?
The Spanish-American War tax. Okay, so this was put on your monthly phone bill, and this tax came out in 1898 and was passed because only rich people had telephones. And the war ended a year after, but every person since then has paid phone tax. So opponents say, well, it's just paper gains. And what happens if these, they never materialize and assets decline? This could force asset sales and disrupting markets, and this might discourage long-term risk taking. I'll tell you, as someone who's an entrepreneur and someone who knows a bunch of business owners, and I risk my own capital all the time, if you tell me that my equity in the businesses I own is being taxed today, I'll shut part of them down. And what I'll do is I'll focus my efforts on the thing that produces the most money with the least amount of hassle that incurs me the most taxes. So
The least amount of taxes?
I'm sorry, the least amount of taxes. So this will shut down investment. But my biggest concern, because I'm a real estate guy, well, what if they just bring it over to real estate? So I want to give you an example from here in the Seattle Metro. If they bring this to real estate, and Pace Morby also, he did a great video on this that you guys can watch too. Let's say you purchase 3 homes in King County. This is the median price for King County. So you purchased 3 homes in January of 2019. And I realize the average person may not be able to go purchase 3, but I just want to show an example because I know multiple people who own 3 homes. So the average or the median price was $569,450. If you purchase 3, it'd be $1,700,000, a little more than that. The median price this year was $860,000. So that would be $2.58 million. If I take the $2.58 million minus the 1.78, you'd have $871,000 in gain. If I times that by a 25% tax bracket, it means you have to pay $217,912.50 in taxes if this passes. And it's due. And every year it goes up, it's due. Well, if you just said every year it goes up, it was due, and you took that $217,000, divide by 5 years, your tax bill every year would have been $43,582. For the small investor, the average investor, and even a lot of big investors, if they had to write a check every year for real estate they owned, they'd have to sell the real estate to pay for the property, which would prevent them from owning it, which would drive down the rental pool and prevent more people from renting. So this, for real estate, if it ever got there, would be catastrophic. And I think this, for long-term viability of our economy, this zaps private equity. This zaps, we wouldn't be making those massive investments in AI if something like this comes available.
So this $217,000 because you own 3 properties that are worth potentially $860,000, right?
That's the gain, $870,000.
But wouldn't this 25% tax only be on a person with a net worth of more than $100 million?
It would be, but that's also what they said about income tax.
Got it. So
it's also what they said about the phone tax.
So you're saying the point is, and this is one of the fears of anybody that doesn't like big government, once it becomes law, it just gets ingrained. It's not like, oh, it's here one day, but it'll be gone next year. It's kind of like, it's here today, it's here forever.
All I need you to do is go look at Google our federal deficit and look how quickly the federal deficit is rising, and look at government spending and ask yourself, did government spending go up or down over time? And did the amount of taxes collected go up or down? And the answer is government spending keeps going up and taxes keeps going up. So once you give politicians a tax, they never give it back. Let me ask the question a different way. Do you know in your lifetime of any tax that in either Washington state or at the federal level has been started that was then removed?
No. I only pay more taxes.
And so, but let's give some examples. In Washington state, we have a gas tax. Has the gas tax gone up or down in our lifetime?
Gone up.
Massively up. What about the sin tax? The sin tax is on tobacco and alcohol. Has that gone up or down?
Oh, my bourbon is way more expensive. Unless I get it from my dad, who gets it tax-free. That's a whole nother story because he's in the Navy.
But it's gone massively up. So what I'm telling you is politicians, and I gave you 2 examples, politicians, once we give them a tax, and this is all of them. This isn't Republican, this isn't Democrat, this isn't independent, this is all of them. Once we give them a tax, they keep taxing us more. That's my fear.
All right. The 11th and final policy for her real estate solutions. What is Harris's plan with this $5 trillion tax plan?
So that's the point I wanted to put together is she has, to kind of tie this all together. Her tax plan has $5 trillion attached to it. That's got to come from somewhere. They have to raise that in the revenue. They're not going to cut the spending. So her tax plan is a massive increase in taxes, number one. On the flip side, she says, I'm not going to raise taxes for anyone making under $400K a year. I just personally don't believe that. I haven't seen politicians stick to that. 3 things I'm going to leave you with that I really like that are not real estate related, but I believe are wildly helpful. And it's all in relation to kids and lower income. Expand the child tax credit from $2,000 per to as much as $3,600. Provide the child tax credit up to $6,000 for newborns. Anything that incentivizes the U.S. to increase and maintain its population, I am very for. You have 5 kids. I have 3 kids. I love my children, and I want to see the next generation have more kids. It's also very pro-housing. That's pro-strong economy, and that also helps us to pay for the entitlement programs, Social Security, and the retirement programs for government employees. We have to have more kids. So I very much support this on all sides of the aisle. The next one is expanding the earned tax income credit. And for lower income families, this would cut their income taxes by an average of $1,250 a year. I'm also very much for that. And I think this is a great policy because anything that helps the lower income, that could help move them into the middle class. It's why I'm so pro home ownership. Home ownership is one of those vehicles that people can use to create wealth and help drive them up in the class. So I very much support this. The majority of our policies are not affecting supply, not solving the red tape problem, and it looks like this is about a $5 trillion increase in taxes over time. I probably missed something here, so tell us in the comments what we missed. I love your opinion on this. This is from reading articles and doing research. If you found this valuable, share it with a friend and subscribe and let us know how we can help you in the future in relation to real estate.